I went to Klerksdorp because we had our nationals for our federation's drum majorette competition. And I was one of the judges. So that was pretty fun. I ate way too much and slept way too much, but had so much fun. So, and actually, they had little stalls there. There was this little duck staring at me.
That is so cute.
And so now it's going to go into my, bookshelf. One thing that was quite interesting, and I don't think people think about, as a judge, was just as surprised to see who came first, second, and third, because I was like, I just focused on one section. I don't know what the rest of it did. And I think that lines up along with writing, because there are so many different elements to it and so many things that people look at. So, for example, when I read a novel, I always want romance in the novel because I'm like, that is what I'm craving. That's what I want. Where other people might be like, oh my gosh, setting, like, tell me about this bird, like, for 5 pages. And then other people are more about the dialogue and I would say, the floweriness of the wording, like literary genre.
And I think that is a good point for finding the right beta readers and the right person to work with, because literary agents all look for different things. Publishers all look at different things as well.
Exactly. I'm super excited about today's episode because I'm like, I'm going to nail that one. I know the last time I had like a matcha latte. And so this time I decided to get the rooibos cappuccino. And look, it's no caffeine.
I'm going with my mango
Classic.
tea.
Are you ready to get into this episode?
I am ready.
Ready, Freddy. Hey, how? Let's go. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Tea and Tales. I'm Madeleine Now.
And I'm Sarah Sampson. Thank you to everyone for tuning in each week and for interacting with our social media. We especially want to thank Anne Nong Lang and S.L. Bullen. Today's episode is going to be Nell's absolute favorite, our part 2 in the subgenres. And because Nell and I specialize in specific genres, we're talking about all the subgenres of romance today.
Yay! I'm very excited about this one because overall I think authors sometimes struggle to figure out what is the difference between a genre and a trope. And what I found is a lot of people will pin their novel down for a certain genre, and then I'm like, that's not a genre, that's a trope of romance, but cool, whatever makes you sleep at night. As we said in the previous episode, with genres, like for romance, you have a generalized list of subgenres that you have for romance, and people might agree with you, people might disagree with you, but this is what I have found through working with people who do write romance, being a romance writer myself, and also just learning from agents who do romance and rape romance and all those things. We're going to start off by saying, what is the romance genre? Okay, so romance is the love story of 2 main characters, okay? And they definitely have to have a happily ever after. And the book focuses on their story, their love story, that they move together. Of course, each individual main character has to have their own needs and their own obstacles and tactics, but it has to align with each other, and then they find their way back to each other.
So what you're saying there is, if I have a fantasy story that is mostly about the journey of these 2 people saving the world, and there happens to be romance, that's not romance genre.
No. That is definitely not romance, and don't even try to convince me.
It's something else. It has elements. Okay, elements of romance.
Exactly. So, easiest way for, I think, someone to definitely know whether they're writing romance or women's fiction or any other genre is that romance has to have a love story. Number 1, love story. It's between 2 people, love story. And secondly, it has to have a happily ever after. If your novel doesn't have a happily ever after, it's not a romance. Okay? There's no discussion about that. Those are the two things. Short and sweet. Short and sweet. Sarah, do you want to read what is a romance subgenre?
So romance subgenre. Nell has done a lot of research on this for me.
So a lot of the information that I got and that I used came from either forevershereads.com and readsy.com and novelpad.co, which is a blog. So any or all things that I'm saying is from there, or my own knowledge that I have up here in my head.
What is a romance subgenre? By definition, a subgenre is a category within a particular genre. Like any story, the romance genre has a plot, and within that plot comes smaller genres, usually connected to a subplot, a secondary story that helps move the romance plot along. So what it's basically saying is the subgenres, they have to have those two characteristics of the main genre that you just talked about.
Yes.
And then you add in a secondary plot or some bits of another genre will break it into one of these subgenres. To spice it up, bringing some interest into the story with these other genres, and that can make it into a romance subgenre.
Yeah, absolutely. Because the thing is, depending on what you choose as your subgenre, you're going to do different research. Because a historic romance novel is going to be way different than writing a gothic romance novel or a contemporary romance novel, because the times are different, the way people act are different, clothing are different, settings are different. So that is why it's important to know what your subgenre is. Then you need to do your research accurately as well.
That makes sense, because you want to be accurate to what people who are saying, I want a contemporary romance versus, oh, I want a fantasy romance, what they're expecting to happen with that romance.
Exactly. One thing I would love to emphasize, okay, I'm going to say this once, very diligently, okay? Are you ready for this, Sarah?
Absolutely.
Tropes are not genres, right? So if you go and query an agent and you say, hi, this is my 97,000 word small town romance, then the agent is going to be like, small town romance is not a genre. It's a trope. Okay. If you go and say, this is my slow burn romance, slow burn is not a genre or a subgenre. It is a trope. Billionaire is a trope.
Now, is that because, for example, we'll take the slow burn. You can have a slow burn type romance happening both in a historical and in a modern story.
So the way I would like to describe it is like when you eat a slab of chocolate, okay? So when you eat a plain slab chocolate, that is romance, okay? When you decide what type of chocolate you want, like, ooh, do you want a mint one? Do you want a nut one? Do you want a Smarties one? That is your subgenre that you choose. Then, if you want to go the extra mile and you want to dip it in extra chocolate or you want to put marshmallow on top of it, that is your tropes that you entwine with your novel, okay? So I think there's 3 levels to it.
No, that makes sense. So like if I was going to explain it to a agent, what I would say that's more accurate is maybe my 70,000 word romantic suspense, and then maybe I could say with the slow burn, such as this other romantic suspense, and like bring in those tropes into that.
Exactly. Because a lot of time what does happen is agents would say on their wish list, they would be like, they love friends to lovers, or they love slow burn, or they love the billionaire trope, or enemies to lovers. And that is in a great way for you to connect with that agent, because then you can say, because you like the enemies to lovers trope, you might be interested in this contemporary romance that does that.
I love being able to break that out so you know what's in your story, but also you can pin down that genre and subgenre.
Exactly. And I mean, for me, all my writing is slow burn. So I won't go to the agency like, here's my slow burn, because they're like, that's like literally all your novels. Like, no. Please just remember tropes are not genres. And so it is hard to distinguish between that, but I think if we go through the list now of subgenres that there is in romance, that might get you a better idea of what is a trope and what is not a trope, what is a subgenre and what is not a subgenre. And also, if you are confused, please leave it in the comments so that we can answer you, because chances are we will be able to tell you, yes, that is a trope. No, that is a subgenre. Please ask. We'll be happy to answer your questions.
The thing about picking out which subgenre you are, I think if you can write down all of the tropes that are in your novel, like what you want to call it, you can more easily pick which subgenre those tropes match.
So you want to do the first one?
Sure. Okay. Young adult romance. I think that is pretty, and new adult romance. So I feel like they're pretty self-explanatory, that you're going to gear it towards readers who want or can handle certain things. As a young adult writer myself, my young adult stories will not get nearly as deep into like the psychological pains and things like that. I'm going to address them in a very different way. So I would assume that that would be more like, I'm not going to get super spicy. I'm going to have this nice sweet romance. And the new adults might stray more into the more adult topics and around the age group of those age groups.
So a great example of this is Make Cabot. So has anyone ever heard of The Princess Diaries?
Mm-hmm.
So Princess Diaries can be seen as a young adult romance because there's romantic elements in the novel. It's about a young adult main character and not a lot of spice in there. A nice little story. It's not life and death situations that they find themselves in. That is what young adult would be considered. And then my favorite, contemporary romance. I say it's my favorite because that's the genre that I write. First of all, it's contemporary, so it takes place in the present time, which means it could be like 5 years ago or like 2 years ago or in the present tense, but generally it's very new, it's very current, and oh my goodness, it's like 5 to 0 spice in there. And so one example would be Ali Hazelwood. So she is a contemporary romance writer. She does write, I think, young adult as well, romance. She has a few novels of that. But the ones that I've read so far has been your contemporary romance. Tessa Bailey would also be contemporary romance. Sarah Adams would be contemporary romance. Abby Jimenez would be contemporary romance. And so they all have different spice levels. They all have different tropes in them, but the general consensus for contemporary romance is that the setting and the life situations that happen are current and in the present tense.
Then we have historical romance. You've also put Regency romance, Victorian romance, Viking romance, medieval romance. First, we're talking anything set in not present times romance. I feel like I've seen a lot of these.
I love historical romance. Like, that is something that I've read a lot of. Lisa Kleypas, love her novels. Like, she's just fantastic. Eloisa James. And you have a lot of other authors that do write historical romance. But it's your typical, like, Duke and Duchess, or like your Rake and Maid, or Nanny, or any of those type of vibes. It's where women didn't have much rights, but men can do basically what they wanted to do. And you have all these like clothing styles, but it's very classy and it's very old time because it's in the olden times, it's history. But as authors of that genre, you really have to do a lot of research to be accurate in the clothes that they wore, in the settings that they had, in the food that they ate, and things like that. But I was reading like historic romance. I like it, I read it, that's fine. But then I also kind of read Regency romance, and I'm like, isn't that kind of the same thing? So clearly it's not, because people define it as two different subgenres. And so do you know what the difference is, Sarah?
I would assume that historical versus Regency. Regency is going to be more like your high society, maybe in England, sort of a romance. And also stemming off, you've got the Victorian and the Viking and the medieval. It kind of pins into the type of history and the class of history that you're going to be delving into.
That is correct. That is correct. I will also add that the focus is less on steamy bits and more on dialogue and social conventions.
So people like Jane Austen would be a popular Regency writer.
Because it's more about the dialogue. It's more about nailed it. 10 out of 10 for you, Sarah. Then it is about the spicy scenes. And I mean, if anyone has ever seen Pride and Prejudice, everyone has that moment where he takes her hand and he puts her on the carriage, and then his hand does that motion thing where he opens and closes it, and you're just like, oh my gosh, like that is even sexier than spicy scenes.
It makes me want to be very proper with my teacup here.
So yes, the next one we have is dark romance. So dark romance is for all those lovely people who just like it down and nasty, basically, is what that is all about. So it goes very deep psychologically, I will say. There's no off limit to what topic they might be discussing. It might be miscarriages, it might be abduction, it might be threats, anything like
Stockholm
that.
syndrome.
Basically, yes. And so there's no, like, if you're a sensitive reader, you would not survive it. It's a very, very dark, emotional novel. And then, of course, it has very super spicy scenes in it.
So the dark romance, though, still being a romance, it has to end happily at the end. But the path to get there is going to be really rocky, basically.
Yes. Well, so one of the things I actually think can be seen as a dark romance is, have you ever seen 365 Days? It's a book, but they turned it into a movie. So basically the first movie is about this guy is obsessed with this woman, so he kidnaps her because he wants to marry her. In normal circumstances, you'd be like, that is not correct. That is not right. And then, of course, naturally you have that then she falls in love with him type of vibes, and you're like, are you okay, ma'am? Like, what is happening right now? So the reasoning behind their actions aren't always, how can you say it nicely, socially acceptable. So they just do things because they want to do it, whether it's a bad thing, a good thing, whatever, and they go for it. So it also includes kind of a lot of BDSM. It's just very dark. Like, if you can't handle dark subjects, don't even bother picking it up, because an author is not going to apologize for what's in their novel, which is their right, because it literally said dark romance. So think of all the most gory, depressing, deprived things that you could possibly write, and that would be dark romance.
So I want to ask the difference between dark romance and erotic romance, because I feel like erotic romance can very much go into the BDSM sort of thing and stuff, but and it's absolutely like, if there is a highest spice level, like it's off that chart sort of a thing. What will change it from being erotic into dark?
Okay, I love that you asked that question, and let me give you 2 examples of what erotic romances would be like. And I feel everybody in the world knows what this novel is. 50 Shades of Grey.
50 Shades.
Exactly, erotica. Okay, and the other one, Sylvia Day, Bare to You. Okay, so those will be considered erotica romance novels. The difference between dark romance and erotica is more focused on sex, where dark romance there's like a 50-50, I almost want to say, on sex versus emotion. So erotica isn't as in-depth with their emotions and their stories, whereas dark romance will be, and more spicy.
Got it. So it's more the focus, and what you're there for is going to be the fun erotic stuff, where
exactly.
Dark romance is going to sink you into that psychological depression.
Yep, 100%. 100%. If you are brave, you will read dark romance. Otherwise, don't hurt yourself.
Both of those are ones that I will never touch and have zero interest in. So let's move on to the reverse harem romance. Now, I find that interesting. Reverse harem, what's that?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so do you know what harem romance is?
Yes, that's usually where a guy has a harem of girls.
So it is where a woman has men. I will disagree with this one, because I don't feel reverse harem is a subgenre. I feel it is a trope. So come at me, please do, and defend yourself and tell me why you think reverse harem is a subgenre for romance.
Fair enough.
Okay, so I won't say much about that one because, yeah, as I said, I have conflicting feelings about that. But basically, this is just the opposite of a harem. And so that is where instead of the male having 7 women, the woman has 7 men. Which, is very female empowering. Like, woohoo, go woman. But yes, I do see it as a trope rather than a subgenre. Okay, so our next one.
These next few feel explanatory to me, but that's only because they start falling into my genre.
I'll say 3 of them fall into your genre, but I will say I will start with paranormal romance. I'm not very into ghosts or vampires or, okay, I did read Twilight, but that's besides the point. I'm a pretty simplistic person when it comes to things like this. But I do not know how I found this woman. I do not know. I honestly do not care. But, like, she has changed my world, and I think the only person whose paranormal romance I will read is hers. So, this is Christine Feehan. Okay. And oh my goodness, like you can see how thick the books are. Okay. And a majority of her novels are like 500 to 600 pages. Okay. But it feels like I'm reading like a 200-page novel because the writing is just so good. And so she has different series. She had like a motorbike gang series, and then she had this Shadow Rider series. And so this isn't extreme paranormal because basically these people can jump shadows. And then they're in a mafia, and so they kill people who do bad things in the world. If I gave away any surprises, whoops, I don't feel bad. But anyways, so this was kind of my introduction to paranormal romance, and I actually quite liked it. Though some of these have elements of dark romance in it, and I was just like, woo, okay, didn't see that one coming, but it's fine, it's fine. Her writing entices me so much, I don't really care. But yes, so paranormal romance generally vibes with people being vampires, werewolves, ghosts, unicorns, centaurs. And then, of course, you get a lot of like indie authors that just go cray-cray with all their experimental mixture of human and not human things. And I'm just like, okay, that's a bit too much. Like, I can read dark romance. I cannot read that. But yes, so that is considered paranormal romance. Then I kind of also... Gothic romance is simply a style. I don't know, if I hear Gothic, I think Wednesday from the Addams Family. As any other subgenre you have, Gothic romance has a very specific setting that they live in. They have very specific rules that they live by, and they have very specific goals and very specific world that they live in.
Like, Gothic is one of those words that I know it exists, and like you said, Addams Family, that's about all I can think about is I don't read anything Gothic, I don't get into Gothic, so I don't know.
I'm not a very Gothic romance as well, but okay, here's the thing. Gothic romance is a subgenre that explores the darkest of love stories through macabre setting. That is incorrect the way I say it, but I'm going to keep going. Settings and haunted characters. These types of romance novels can be set in Middle Ages or modern times, but will typically include elements of horror, mystery, and gore. So think of it as like a thriller almost. Okay, so the next one, I think Sarah and I have a little bit of a situationship over it.
I think sci-fi romance kind of speaks for itself. It's a romance happening in a scientific environment. So whether it's in the future with technology that we don't have, it could be in space with technology we don't have. It's scientifically imaginative, but focused on that romance. But then the two that we're kind of wishy-washy on, because I think it's because I am so specific about my fantasy. So there's fantasy romance and urban fantasy romance. And Nell's like, oh, they're the same thing. And I'm like, oh, no, they're not.
No.
And I think that's because as a fantasy writer, there's a huge difference between your urban fantasy and your hard fantasy. In regular fantasy, it can be off-world, it could be a second world, completely made-up world. It might be fantasy realism where it's a world like ours, but then there's some rule that's changed that's fantastic or magical. Urban fantasy means you are on our planet, you are in our time, it is urban, small town somewhere, but with fantasy in it. So there's going to be magic and there might be magical creatures, but we're here in an urban environment.
That makes so much more sense. So I would rather than say fantasy romance would be romantasy. And that is like what everybody is talking about. The ACOTAR series. So that is what I would consider fantasy romance or romantasy, as a lot of people know that genre. So yes. Okay. Then we have romantic suspense. So romantic suspense is basically romance novels that has crime in it. So it would either be a detective on a case and it is the victim he falls in love with. Or it could be like, it was his partner's wife and he has had a crush on her for all this time, but he passed away and now he tries to help him solve the case or something like that. So that is what romance suspense is. So it is romance, but it has the elements of mystery and crime in it. Then we have romantic comedy, rom-com. And Tessa Bailey is a great example of it. Abby Jimenez is a great example of that. And they feel it's in the words that you say. It's a romance, but it has comedic elements to it. Contemporary romance can have very deep feelings. So it sounds weird, but have deep feelings. So a lot of topics about ADHD, about miscarriages, about bipolar people, about like all those lovely topics we can discuss falls generally under contemporary romance. And it's not to say that it can't be under rom-com, but with rom-com you have to have a very witty, snappy dialogue, because that is what keeps the comedy in the dialogue, in the rom-com, basically.
Just like keeping it light and fluffy and humorous as you're dealing with the harder topics, but you want to keep it on a level that people feel like they're not getting dragged down by it.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, then we have inspirational romance, which I will side note with religious romance and clean romance, because naturally you can have a contemporary romance that's a clean romance. But yeah, let's go with inspirational religious romance. So a great example would be Laurie Wick. Naturally, this is my favorite one of the four that she wrote, because she writes a lot of series. Inspirational romance novels or religious romance novels is the same as any other romance, where it's about two people who fall in love, who have a love story and a journey together. But generally in inspirational romance, it would be a Christian religion that is being talked about, but it would be also about Christian values that go into the novel. So definitely not spicy at all. If there's a kiss in there, then that is like, whoa, hold your horses type of vibes. So you will be lucky if you find a kiss in these romance novels.
So this last one, I feel like I know it. So tell me if I'm wrong. So you said Western romance, and not to confuse it with small town, which is a trope. And I think the difference there is, like small town you can see in a lot of Hallmark movies and stuff like that, where Western romance you're going to be in the environment of the Wild West and cowboys and cow wrestling, all of that sort of stuff, that environment. Not necessarily that it's a small town, just that most towns were small back then.
Exactly, 1000%, because anything can happen in a small town. You can have a bakery in a small town. You can be a doctor in a small town. Whereas Western focuses more on, I want to say, the cowboy lifestyle. So horses, ranches, cowboys, all those type of elements to it. So I don't know about you, but I'm exhausted now because this was a really long list, but it was a very informative list, I feel.
This is part of why a lot of people don't want to dig into all of the genre and subgenre, because there are such small nuances between some of these, and you really have to research them, read them, and figure out where your book falls inside of a genre. Thank you so much for everybody hanging out with us for this and going into the weeds with us, and Nell for doing all of her due diligence on romance novels. We like to keep it short here on Tea and Tales. Get your fingers back on the keyboard and your pens back on paper.
And if you love what we are doing here, the topics that we are discussing, and the new fun facts that you can learn, go follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Threads at Tea and Tales Podcast, and on Twitter/X and TikTok at Podcast Tea Tales. And go to that purple icon on your device and go like and share and give us 5 stars. And tell us if you think that there is a subgenre we haven't mentioned before, or if there's a subgenre which you're like, no, that is not a subgenre, and here are my reasons why. Then that could be a lovely discussion.
Happy writing!
Bye!